Hello guys, and welcome to a new Steel Division 2 video today by me, Vulcan. In this one I have the Battlegroup preview for the 1st Polish Infantry Division, which is the third of 4 new divisions added in the latest DLC, Death on the Vistula. As usual, I'm going to be going through each of the sections individually, having a look at the units and giving my opinions on them, and also, because it's a Polish division, you guys can have a laugh at me trying to pronounce the units. Now I've set up the 1st Polish Infantry as the Vanguard deployment type, pressing on in Phase A, putting a lot of aggression into this particular battle group. That comes down to a few things from the Recon tab, Infantry tab, and so on that I'll cover as we go through. But either way, let's jump on into the Recon tab. So first of all, we have the BA-10M. These can be brought in Phase A. They're nice and cheap, great infantry support. They have 2 machine guns, they have HE shells on their main gun, and they're armoured. So at the 750 meter range, these absolutely help you demolish infantry and are fantastic infantry support, providing the recon as well. Then in Phase A, I also have a card of the Su-57s. These have the M1 gun on them, the 115mm of penetration. These are also fantastic because they have the really high rate of fire, 12 round per minute rate of fire. With the 1-star veterancy, that goes up to 14. With 2-star veterancy, it goes up to 16. And then with 3-star veterancy, it goes up to pretty much 18 round per minute rate of fire, which is crazy good for the amount of penetration that you have and the amount of damage that is. It's not APCR shells, so they do 5 damage a shot. You can pop tanks left, right, and center. The only thing I would say is that this won't survive a shot. The armor is very, very light, so be careful not to trade these badly against things like AT guns. But if you come up against like an abundance of enemy Panzer IVs or something, you're going to be popping them all day long. And also in Phase A, you have access to the T-34-76 model 1941s, some recon tanks here, really useful for supporting those early game pushes. And one thing you may have noticed is that all of the vehicles I've clicked on so far are only available in Phase A, which is pushing more towards the Vanguard style of play. And then we have the Zwiad Koni. These guys have PPSH, Mosin Nagants, MG42s. Nice, strong, 11 strength recon squad. They can fight in the mid-game whilst providing you that closer range recon information. So that's what they're there for, to support your current infantry in the fight. Other choices in the Recon tab include the Motorcycle Recon, never any good because of its lack of armor, gets killed by light arms fire very quickly. You've got the Zwiadalsi in here, which have the BA-20s and BA-64Bs. They're able to come in. You can also get them in the M3A1 Rozvedka and the Universal Carrier there with the Boys AT rifle and the standard Universal Carrier as well. All of those recon vehicles are worth considering because they provide their own recon if you want extra availability. And you do get a reasonable amount of these on a card. Then there's a Carrier Dushka, which comes with the Dushka on top as well as the Bren in the front. And then we have the Zmot Zwiadalsi, which are the 8-man squads, similar to Rozvedka squads. The difference being with these is that they don't have a bazooka, they actually have a Panzerfaust, which makes them a lot less desirable than a Rozvedka squad. Rozvedka squads are fantastic because they get the 200 meter range of a bazooka, which allows them to ambush enemy units very easily. In this case, the Panzerfaust definitely not as good, unfortunately. And that's pretty much your lot. You can get a second card of the Zwiad Koni. Into the infantry tab we go, and first of all we have Strelcy with the SVTs. These are 9-man squads, very similar to the Recon 8-man squads, but they've got 7 SVTs, 2 submachine guns and Panzerfaust. Really decent sort of mid-close range infantry squad for the early game, but don't really carry too much to the late game due to their lack of numbers and their lack of a machine gun. And I've got a card of the Strelskal, or Strelskal, something like that, I don't know. Either way, a 4-man squad with SVT, 40s and the PPSH and smoke grenades. 4-man recon or command squad, and the fact you can get 4 availability with 1-star veterancy is actually really nice. So definitely recommend bringing these in Phase A because you get that much availability of them. Then there's the Descent Zol Galvi. These are basically Tanko Desaniki, and they have 8 submachine guns and the smoke grenades, pretty similar. And you can also bring them in with the 50 cal half track, the M3A1 there. The last unit to point out in Phase A here is the Odzialkani. These guys, they're 20-man squads, very similar to Strafniki. You've got the 13 Mosin Nagants, 3 submachine guns, 3 DPs, and the PTRD. Very, very strong squads, but they are going to require the NKVD nearby to prevent them falling back if you don't want them to fall back, that is. One actual nice thing that I've always failed to mention about disheartened squads is that they do fall back on their own, and that can sometimes be a good thing because it allows the squad to stay alive in positions where you may forget them. So if you want to do like a blind push on one side of the map with these guys, but they get overwhelmed, they'll automatically fall back for you. Whereas if, say, you leave them to do that attack and then you look elsewhere and they're not disheartened, then they'll probably just get killed out in the open. So sometimes having disheartened troops can be a good thing if you're not so good on the micro. I've got more of those coming in at Phase B. You can get 12 on a card in Phase B. You can only bring them in at Phase A or B. Again, focusing more on the Vanguard playstyle. Same deal with the Desan here. You can only bring them in Phase A or B, and you can only bring them in Phase A with the 1-star veterancy with the 50 cal half track. So again, focusing a lot more on the Vanguard deployment type. In Phase B, you do get access to the Superzi, and these are fantastic squads. Really, really good. 4 submachine guns, 5 SVTs, 2 machine guns. They're kind of like a Superi DP squad, but they also have a flamethrower. It's pretty nuts. So these guys, fantastic at close range, and as the unit tries to run away, they're going to mow them down with those machine guns. Really, really strong squads, definitely worth bringing. You can get 8 of them in Phase B with 1-star veterancy. Make these 3-star veterancy, and you're going to be having a great time in both long range and medium range combat. Then in Phase C, just to fill out the rest of the game when you head into that more support role, I've got the Strelzy CKM here, which have the SVTs, double DP, and the PTRD. These are a lot like the Gvardia DP that you can get in the Grupa Churen. Very, very similar loadout, but of course they have different uniforms with the Polish outfits. Now, other squads that you can get, we've got the 4-man Superi squad with the Panzerfaust. These are similar to the Superi PPSH. You can get in other similar Soviet divisions. And just in general, I'm just going to go out there and say that the 1st Polish Infantry is a lot like many of the Soviet divisions, but of course you have all of the Soviet uniform, or the Polish, uniforms, and some other unique Polish infantry units and other units as well. Then we see the different leader squads you can get access to. These guys, the 3 PPSH and Smoke, aren't as good. These are the Sturmovi command squads. You can get a limited amount of availability of them in Phase A and B. A 2-star veterancy. I used to favour the 2-star veterancy because they had a wider command radius, but unfortunately they've kind of fallen out of favour with me, as having more leader units is generally better with the new command system that was introduced in Steel Division 2. You can get a lot of Strelzy, by the way. You can get a lot of these, but I don't think you ever want to bring them because they're a little bit of a waste. They're very similar to standard Gvardia squads. They've got the PPSH, 9 Mosin Nagants, 1 DP, and the AT grenade, but all of the other choices that we've got are just so much better in my opinion. Then there's the 3 submachine guns with AT command or leader. There's the one with PPSH, SVTs, and Panzerfaust. And then there's more available of these guys, the 4-man squads, which I definitely recommend because they have the utility of the smoke grenade there. And then we have the good old Druzina Stürmowa. These guys are basically like Avtos. And they have the 10 submachine guns and the RPG-43 there. You can indeed bring these in the M3A1s in Phase A instead of the 8-man squads. But I like the 8-man squads for the early game because they have the smoke, which helps you in situations where you bump straight into the enemy. It allows you to block that line of sight very quickly, whereas Avtos just end up like out in the open, or these guys, the Druznia, they end up like out in the open and just end up getting mowed down by longer range infantry. Also, they're more expensive, so with a M3A1 half-track, you're thinking like 45 points a squad in Phase A, which is pretty expensive even for Vanguard deployment type. Then there's the standard Saperi squads. These guys are similar to Saperi. They have the 7 SVTs, DP, and HE grenades. Actually pretty damn decent close-range infantry squads because they have that medium-range capability as well. Like decent firepower to back up the HE grenade is something you're always looking for with those HE grenade squads. Then we have another card of the Straki CKM if you want more of them. There's 2 more squads of them as well. And then you've got the DCA Separo, which is like the leader squad for the disheartened troops, although this doesn't stop them falling back. Only the troops in the support tab stop units falling back. Yeah, leader squads do not. So bear that in mind, but yeah, these guys have HE grenades and they're quite strong squads. They got 10 strength, but lack of availability with higher veterancy is why I prefer the smaller squads in this case. Right, over to the tank tab. Now the tank tab, not the best tab of the 1st Polish Infantry, that's for sure. You just have an abundance of T-34s and T-70s. That's pretty much it. I basically said it all with that sentence. But let's just quickly go through it. T-34 76 model 1943s. You can bring these in Phase A, B, and C, and you can get quite a lot of them, honestly. If you want to do like a late game sort of man-span division supported by T-34s, you could potentially set that up. But these T-34Es, they come in with 1-star veterancy. You are forced to bring them in with the 1-star veterancy, which basically means that you miss out on some of the availability you'd otherwise get. But the nice thing about this is you could bring in a lot of T-34s in the early game and really like push hard early with the T-34s, with the recon support you've got here, plus the infantry, including the M3A1 half-tracks here. So I feel like that's a really solid combo that can support a Vanguard division. Which is why I've set it up as I have. But if you want to play it more balanced or maybe more Juggernaut, you can actually bring in a lot of T-34s in the late game if you want to. And Phase B, I'm actually bringing in T-70s just to give some sort of light tank and armoured support to my infantry to sort of continue the momentum a little bit. They're also really cheap, so that helps out as well. Like 30 points, the T-70 is not actually that bad. And the slots in the tank tab aren't all that expensive. Although, is that 3 points? Maybe there will be something to replace a T-70 with if I figure that out later on. But either way, for now, the T-70s, having 16 of them in Phase B, kind of makes up for your sort of mid-game. Then you've got the Command and T-34 76 variants if you want them, but not really much space for them, unfortunately. Moving into the Sport tab, we have the NKVD to start. So these, I think, aren't totally necessary, but I have them for if I don't want my 20-man squads to fall back, basically. That's what they're there for. It may be worth removing these because they are using up 2 activation points in order to get something else, but for now I've left them in just to kind of keep them with those disheartened units. Then I've got a card of the 76 mils. You can bring these in at 1-star veterancy and you only lose 1 availability on the card. So you get 6 in Phase A or you get 5 in Phase B, or not Phase B, 5 at 1-star veterancy. So you may as well bring them in at 1-star veterancy and then you can push them to 3-star to make their rate of fire much higher. Unfortunately, these infantry guns, the 76 mils, they lack the heat rounds that the OBs have, but still relatively useful as infantry support guns. Then I have a card of the supply in Phase A and Phase C. I've got the combat here, which is the leader, or commander, sorry, and this buffs other leader squads. Then other choices include the flamethrower. You've got these boys, as usual, bring them in with the 1-star veterancy, and they can support your infantry squads or even be strong on their own if you can make them 3-star veterancy with leaders nearby. Then there's the Maxim Machine Gun, not very strong at the moment. I'd recommend staying away from it. There's more supply available. It's actually quite a lot of supply available in the 1st Polish Infantry compared to the home army. And then you have the 2 other commander units. Now, one thing I was just thinking about was maybe you don't need the extra supply here in Phase C. You could actually bring it in Phase B because you're playing Vanguard. So having extra supply available for your Phase B artillery may be the way to go. But either way, let's jump into the anti-tank tab. So the anti-tank tab here, you have quite a lot of availability of AT guns. In Phase A, I've got a card of the 45 mils. We've seen these plenty of times before, but we've got them in at the 1-star veterancy in Phase A, and they're just being brought in with the Studbecker because it's the only thing that I can. Then there's these guys have the APCR shells, which are great for sort of hitting higher armored targets at closer ranges. But the great thing about these is their reasonable rate of fire with the 75mm penetration on the AP shells, which is good enough to penetrate things like Panthers in the side armor about 1000 meter range. So these are good ambushing tanks, or AT guns, sorry, in the mid to late game, whereas in the early game they're all about like long range transport sniping. Then there's a card of the Su-76Ms, good if you need a little bit more firepower in the early game. They get the 135mm of penetration on the APCR shell. The standard AP shells only have 105mm of penetration, which is just 5mm more than a standard T-34, but these only cost 35 points apiece compared to the 50 points of a T-34E or the 45 points of a T-34-76. So you get that extra firepower for cheaper, but they are also much weaker as well. They do die to AT guns, but in a situation where you're not up against AT guns and you're up against enemy armor, the extra aim time that these guys have, or I would say reduced aim time that these guys have because they're an open top tank destroyer unit, they can snapshot tanks quite well for you if you have them at higher veterancy, which is why I'm bringing them in at the 1-star veterancy. They also only lose 1 availability if you do that. In Phase B, we've got more 45mm AT guns, and I've also got a card of the ZIS-3s. We're bringing these in with no veterancy, because if you go up to the 1-star veterancy, you lose 3 of them on the card, which is actually a lot. But these kind of replace the 45mm into the mid and late game, if you need a little bit more firepower against things like Tigers and Panthers, but you are still going to be trying to side shot those. You're not going to be able to penetrate them in the front armor from over like 1000 meter range, so bear that in mind. I also have the Su-85s for the same reason, but dealing with the Tigers and Panthers in the late game. These are actually pretty nice ambushing tanks, but because their rate of fire is so low, you're going to want to fire that 1 shell and then reverse immediately into cover. Otherwise, in extended engagement, these are just going to die very, very quickly indeed. So these are quite micro-management heavy, so maybe bear that in mind if that's not something that's really up your street. And the only other thing that you can get in the anti-tank tab that we, like out of the choices we have, is the PTRS. And yeah, I'd just avoid this. The PTRS is not really as good as the PTRD as far as I'm aware. I think the PTRD has slightly more penetration. Let's have a look. Oh, maybe not. Alright, so it's about the same. There was one reason why it's worse. Can't remember what it was. Maybe the PTRS is actually better. Either way, not really worth bringing in as a 2-man squad regardless. So I'd just ignore that and focus on what you want to bring in terms of AT guns. Moving into the anti-air tab, we have just 37mm for days. They're going to be brought in with the Tadeusza trucks. You can actually get quite a few of these Tadeusza trucks, so I've got 6 37mm, all being brought in with the Tadeusza trucks, currently manned by French infantry. I'm sure that's going to get changed in the future, but it's amusing for now at least. Then we have the 85mm dual-purpose gun here. This thing is great for its high rate of fire against tanks, and also you have the HE power against enemy aircraft as well. So this can blot out the sky if you have enough of them and stop any aircraft getting close. So in the late game, when you're playing more of a support kind of role, these can help your team out massively, especially in like 3v3, 4v4. Other choices, the Maxim 4M. Unfortunately, this thing just never gets picked because it's just, the value of this is just very limited. Against infantry, it just gets killed very quickly because it has no armor, and it also barely does any damage against aircraft unless they get really, really close to it or hover around it for a little while. Otherwise, 37 mils are always the way to go. Now, one thing you could argue is maybe you want to bring in the M17s instead of the 85 mil, but personally I feel like the M17s currently underperform, just because 50 cals got nerfed and therefore these don't do as much damage against aircraft as they used to. So not that fantastic, but maybe worth a thought. You can't get many of them and you can only bring them in Phase A anyway. Now into the artillery tab. This is quite an interesting one because there's basically a choice here that you've got to make. With my Vanguard deployment type, I have the mortars in Phase A, of course, but I also have the Katyusha in Phase A. Now, having the Katyusha in Phase A is pretty important because you're relying on T-34s. So the Katyusha is there to help you pin down Panthers and Tigers. The trouble is, though, is that Panthers and Tigers often don't get fully pinned by one barrage from a Katyusha. So I have been tempted to shift these to Phase B in order to kind of save up a tank force in Phase A and then make a strong push as soon as Phase B comes in, buy 2 Katyushas, fire them where I need to do, and then do a massive push, kind of like you would with like Maverick, although Maverick tends to build up towards the end of Phase B. But like with Vanguard, you can use all of your points in Phase A to just build up a huge blob, and then as soon as you get in Phase B, buy these bad boys, fire them away at whatever hard targets you need to kill or pin down, and then charge in with all of the T-34s that you've bought in Phase A. At least that was the thought, and that's kind of like my theory crafting here. But for now, I'm just relying on the Katyusha in Phase A so I can make fast and furious attacks from the start. But yeah, I've been kind of weighing up the pros and cons of doing like the delayed push as opposed to the early push. Regardless, moving into Phase B, we have the Su-76Ms available. Decent for actually killing heavy tanks, honestly. If you're within 1,500 meter range of an enemy target, the Su-76s can use their own radio range, and when they're doing so, they can track their target, so they will continuously fire their HE at whatever it is until it's dead, even if it's moving, which can be really, really useful for popping like tanks, basically. The only trouble with that strategy is you've got to find cover that's close enough to do that, so bear that in mind. And since like enemy tanks can fire at 2,000 meter range, you know, that's going to be precarious for sure. But great when you're in towns, and I've showed that off previously. Then we have a card of the 122mm artillery pieces. These are fantastic because of the heat shells. They have 160mm of penetration, so that's at all ranges as well. So normally with an AP shell, how it works is there is a penetration drop off at range, and when the enemy tank gets up to like 500 meters, I think it caps out, and you get more penetration. So you can penetrate more armor at closer range with AP shells. With heat shells, you have the same penetration at all ranges, so you have 160 mils of penetration. That means against something like a King Tiger or something, you're always going to have like at least, I think it's like 10-20% penetration at max range with one of these, which isn't all that bad, honestly. And if you get a side shot, well, you're going to get the kill because it has quite a lot of damage. You can see it's got 8 damage on the shell, which is much higher than a standard AP round. And so one-shots are very much possible with these if you use them direct fire. They've also got the indirect fire capability, and they're actually relatively accurate with the 40% accuracy. So maybe have them in a position on the backside of a forest where you can use them as artillery. And then if you see like a tank come into range of them on the other side of the forest, move them through the forest to the side where they're facing the tank, and then use them as an AT gun. I think that's probably the best way to deploy these, like kind of near the front line, but not in direct line of sight initially. Anyway, other choices are the 2-man observer squads. You can get the leaders, of course, the artillery leaders. There's also F-22s. These are pretty standard artillery guns, but nothing special. You can also get 120mm mortars. Again, they lack in accuracy really in comparison to the 82mm, which is why I've been preferring the 82mm lately. The 120mm just seem to have too much dispersion, even with extra veterancy. And that's pretty much your lot for the artillery tab. Let's jump into the air tab. So my air tab's pretty simple in terms of the choices that I've taken. I've just got IL-2Ms with the cluster munitions in phase A and B, and then they're supported by the Yak-1Bs, which give me my fighters for the entire game pretty much. There isn't really much choice other than this, I don't believe. And it's funny because you have quite a lot of tabs that you can fill with an air force. So I feel like this is a little bit of a noob trap. People might invest quite a lot into Air Force, when if I show you guys what you have to offer, it's pretty lackluster. So first of all, the Recon aircraft, the PO2s, they're not really worth activation points in my opinion. Then there's the IL-2Ms. They come with 4 50kg bombs, which is a really light payload for an IL-2, and they don't even have like 37mm cannons on the wings or anything like that, so very, very lackluster. Then there's the Yak-1Bs, which I've got 1 card of already. After that, the Yak-1Bs with 2 50kg bombs. So again, really awful payload. It may be worth considering bringing in these instead of the fighter variant, just because in the game now, there is a system where once aircraft drop their payload, they speed up to the same speed as their standard fighter variant. So it may be worth bringing these in at 1-star veterancy with the 2 50kg bombs now instead of the standard Yak-1Bs. Something to think about, and I think it may change the meta a little bit, but I'm yet to see people sort of focus on fighter bombers over standard fighters, just because fighters are generally more reactionary, whereas fighter bombers are more sort of like proactive. Anyway, IL-2 here, this has 2 250kg bombs, which is a little bit better, but still not the best payload. There's no rockets here on the IL-2s, which is what you really, really like on an IL-2. There's Yak-7B. This comes with some frag rockets. Again, the frag rockets are pretty lackluster in their power, although you can get a lot of these Yak-7Bs, and Yak-7Bs are better really than Yak-1Bs. So it may be worth like considering bringing the Yak-7Bs, because once they use their payload, again, they speed up to the fighter variant, which is like 630 km/h speed, which would make them pretty decent at dogfighting. Finally, there's the Yak-3, but you can only get one of them in phase A at 2-star veterancy. So yeah, it's a good fighter, but is it worth bringing in? Probably not for the activation points. And that's your lot. That's the 1st Polish Infantry. So, as you may have noticed throughout, there's not really much substance that you can bring in the late game, which is why I feel like the 1st Polish Infantry definitely suits the Vanguard playstyle. And the way that I see it working is just you push with the T-34s either in the early game or at the end of phase A if you decide to bring in the 2 Katyushas in phase B instead of in phase A. Like, that's basically it. You time it all with your T-34s and infantry, and then the recon on top, and then you just kind of turn into a support player with an abundance of AT guns, the AA, and then maybe the IL-2s can come in handy late game as well. But the IL-2s are really there with the cluster munitions, to kill any hard targets like Panthers and Tigers in the early game. Although these IL-2s aren't really all that successful at doing so, you've got to get pretty lucky to like one pass a Tiger or Panther with one of those, unfortunately. But it can happen, and if it does, then you're laughing, because your T-34s are going to run all over the enemy. So either way, that's the first Polish infantry. I think I got through the pronunciation relatively okay there, because a lot of the units are in fact already in the game. But yeah, this division is very similar to other Russian divisions. It's basically, I think, like historically, it was made out to be the same sort of format as Russian divisions. It's like more of a formal division, whereas the home army is definitely much more like ragtag bunch of dudes who got together during the Warsaw Uprising. But either way, yeah, that's it. That's my overview on the 1st Polish Infantry. If you guys want to copy the deck codes, there is a link in the description to all of my Battlegroup codes, so make sure to go check that out. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.